Hello everyone and welcome back to the second game of the quarterfinals of the match Magnus Carlsen versus Alireza Firouzja. Alireza won the first one and now Magnus needs to force a win with the white pieces in order to force tie breaks and take it from there. And Alireza, of course, will do everything he can not to lose this game with black. So let's check it out. Magnus with the white pieces opens with pawn to e4. And of course, why wouldn't you? You already have a rook on e1. Pawn to e5, we have pawn to g3. You would also very much like to open up those bishops as well as black. c6, now with some ideas of d6, maybe d5. We have pawn to c3 and g6, now opening up the dark square bishop. Knight to e3, knight to e6, and now knight to e2. We have knight to e7. Alireza playing every move symmetrical to Magnus's setup. Rook to f1, and now rook to f8. So Alireza keeping the symmetry with pawn to f4 striking in the center, and Alireza strikes right back, pawn to f5. And now look at this, f captures on e5, f captures on e5, and now rook captures on e8 with on f8 with check. And this is where the symmetry is broken. And Magnus mentioned during the interview that he wasn't really worried about Alireza playing symmetrical. You know, if he can maybe get a boring position there where there's not all that much you can do, where he can easily force a draw. He was confident that he would be able to get some sort of a playable position once the symmetry is broken. So, okay, knight captures on f8, and now queen captures on e4. Alireza captures on e5, and now queen to b4, avoiding the queen trade, putting pressure on b7. And here we have pawn to b6 by Alireza. This is, well, suboptimal to say the least. The way to play is pawn to a5. And after queen captures on b7, you attack the queen, and once the queen moves, you capture on b2, and this will give you a lot more counterplay. But he played pawn to b6, and now we have pawn to d4, attacking the queen on e5, queen to a5, offering a trade, and now Magnus trades, ruining Alireza's pawn structure while doing so. We have pawn to d5, he also wants to open up this diagonal, the rook is still on a8, c captures on d5, and now he just castles queenside by bringing another attacker to the d file. Rook to c8, and okay, castling queenside might have been a little bit better, but he decides to keep the king in the center. Rook c8, knight captures on d5, and now knight to c6. And this is a big problem for Alireza, that he's unable to trade here. The problem is if he trades, then Magnus will just capture, and after captures, he will also capture the pawn on a5. He will lose a pawn, and he will have a much better position pushing for the win. Objectively, it is a winning position for Magnus. Also, the a7 pawn is hanging, so it's a really bad position. So instead, Alireza tries to keep everything on the board. Knight to c6 and the bishop to e3 now, with some ideas of bishop to g5 check, but you know, all in all, just developing pieces. Knight to e6, and now bishop to g2. We have king to e8, and now pawn to a3. We have bishop to f7, now comes knight e to f4, offering some trades here, and pawn to g5, kicking away the knight. We have knight to h3 and pawn to h6, trying to keep everything solid, as for the moment the material is still equal. We have knight to f2 by Magnus, d6, and now knight to e4. We have bishop to e5, defending the d6 pawn, and now knight e to f6 with check. We have king to f8, of course you don't trade, and now knight to d7 with check, going after the bishop on e5, king to g7, and knight captures on e5. We have d captures on e5, and now pawn to b4 by Magnus. This will help Alireza get rid of his doubled A pawn, but it will also help you start advancing those pawns. So A captures on B4, and now a very interesting move, A captures on B4. And it looks like it could be a bit scary because of knight captures on B4 as the C pawn is pinned, but the knight on D5 guards the B4 square, so it's not a problem. We have G4, preventing Magnus's kingside pawns from being expanded further, and now king to B2, getting off of that C file. Rook to b8 now with ideas of pawn to a5, and now knight to c7, offering some trades here and also opening up an attack towards the knight on c6. So knight captures on c7, bishop captures on c6, and here we have knight to b5. We have a rook to d7, putting pressure on the bishop here, and king to f6, unpinning. You don't want to see a bishop to d5 here, so king to f6, and now bishop captures on a7, just winning a pawn without allowing Alireza to advance it to a5. He captures on a7, rook captures, and now bishop to g6. And here we have bishop to rook to e6, threatening some nasty discoveries. And if you look at the position now, Magnus is up a pawn, and he does have two connected pass pawns on the queen side, which means that if Alireza doesn't come up with something quickly, he's just going to lose the game. So king g5, we have rook to a8, offering a rook trade, and of course rook to b6. Alireza cannot trade. Pawn to b5, and now bishop to d3, trying to win the b5 pawn, but of course rook to a5. Magnus just defends it. We have pawn to e4, Alireza starts advancing his past e pawn, king to b3. We have pawn to e3, pawn to c4, and here we have king to f5. If you play e2, then just rook to a1, and you don't really care. The e1 square is defended. So instead, king to f5 was played, but now rook to a8, and he was in this position on move 41 that Alireza Firouzja resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. You're down one pawn, but very soon it's going to be two pawns. To give you an example, for example, e2, you're going to stop promotion with rook to e8, and now, okay, you could try some tricky moves like king f6, king to c3, and now rook to b8 to deflect the rook off of the defense of the queening square, but just rook to e3, you don't mind. And if bishop to f5, you're going to play king to d4, and now the pawns are marching forward. Not much to be done here. Rook to d8 check, even bishop to d5, and now the pawns are marching forward. It's an easy win for Magnus. So this is what happened in the classical game. Magnus equalized, and now they go into rapid tiebreaks. So two rapid games will be played, and then if those are drawn, then they go into the blitz section. So let's check out what happened in the first game of the rapid playoffs. It was a really wild one, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. In this one, Alireza had the white pieces, and he opened with pawn to c4. Makes sense. You open up the queen, you want to capture on h7. Magnus played knight to f6, defended the pawn, and now pawn to b4. As you know, it often works greatly in a normal chess. We have pawn to c5. Magnus also goes after the h2 pawn, and now b captures on c5. Very interesting. Alireza allows Magnus to capture on h2, but it's not like it's a great move. Magnus, however, does capture it, and now Alireza kicks away the queen with knight to f3. The problem is the g2 pawn is also hanging, so you kind of want to kick the queen away as soon as possible. But the real trick was to go knight to g3 first, not knight to f3 right away. And now if queen captures on g2, now play e4, and the black queen is stuck on g2. This is how our good friend the engine says that we should play this, and it's a really tricky position where the queen, you're just giving up the h and g pawn. The queen is very close to the white king, but not a lot of squares. For example, knight g6, bishop to b2. You just continue playing. Pawn to e5, bishop to f3. You go after the queen. Queen to h2, the knight comes to f5. And it's, the knight is coming to e2, to g3. That queen, will not have all that many squares. But, okay, knight to f3 was played. Alireza attacks the queen and now invites Magnus to capture on g2. But, of course, if you capture now, then once knight g3 lands, it's a very difficult position. So Magnus goes back quickly, queen to c7, and now pawn to d4. We have pawn to b6, trying to ruin this beautiful center Alireza created. Pawn to e4, and now b captures on c5. Pawn to e5, attacking the knight, and rook to b8, attacking the queen here. Queen to d3, and now knight to g4. We have castles, as why wouldn't you? And c captures on d4. And now we have queen captures on d4. You could also capture on h7, although it's not very impressive. Knight to g6 lands, and then it's similar to what would happen if black went after those kingside pawns that we've shown in the start of the game. Queen captures here, you're going to play bishop to b7, and that queen is stuck there. But the real way to play this was queen to f5, to put pressure on the knight, and once the knight moves, only then capture. For example, if the knight goes back to h6, then you capture, and then once you capture on g7, the knight will also be hanging. So, bit of an improvement. But Alireza's move is also excellent. He played queen captures on d4. Idea being that he wants to play bishop to f4 to put pressure on the queen and the rook, sharing the diagonal. Pawn to f5 by Magnus, very tricky as it opens up the diagonal. We have captures on f6, en passant, knight captures, and bishop to f4. And now, while Magnus could play something like d6, it doesn't really work because c5 comes, and now again you can't really do anything. If captures just captures, the rook on b8 would hang. So instead, after bishop to f4, Magnus played queen to b7. He offered the exchange on b8, and interestingly, the engine says you should just play bishop to c2 and rook to b1, but you know, that's for the engines to decide. Alireza does grab the exchange. He plays bishop captures on b8, queen captures on b8, and only now bishop to c2, preparing to go after Magnus's queen. We have castles here. It's very funny. If this is the position, it just looks like the king jumps over the rook. But okay, rook 8 to b1, we have queen to c7, and now knight to g3. We have pawn to e6 and knight to e4, offering some trades here, as Magnus's pieces aren't really developed yet. We have knight captures on e4, and now bishop captures on e4. If you play queen captures with the threat of captures, then just pawn to g6 is fine. So bishop captures on e4 is definitely more precise. Bishop to e7, and now queen to d3. And okay, just g6 as h7 was hanging either way. Knight to d4 and pawn to a6. Now not allowing anything to land on b5. We have knight to b3 now, preparing to push c5, and knight to f7. We have pawn to f4, controlling the knight, and now king to g7. We have king to h1, knight to d6, attacking the bishop here, and just pawn to c5. Knight captures, queen captures, and now what do you play? Bishop to b7, attacking the queen. Of course, if you go after the pawn with something like bishop captures on c5, then you go rook f to c1, and now d6 will be met with there are a lot of tricky moves. Knight captures on c5 is fine, but even queen to d4 check. And if you capture, then the queen will be captured with check, and then you're going to recapture on d4. And if e5, then f captures on e5, and it's just a ruined position for black. So instead, after queen captures on e4, bishop to b7, Magnus goes after Alireza's queen. Now comes queen e5 check, offering a queen trade, but basically forcing it, as the queen on c7 is undefended. Captures, captures, and now rook to c8, going after the c5 pawn. Rook to f4, and now bishop to d5. The real way to play this is g5, because what Alireza is doing is he's threatening rook b to f1, followed by rook to f7. So you want to kick away that rook. But in the game, bishop to d5 was played, and here Magnus really tries some funny stuff. He's still down the exchange, but he is up on the clock. He has 4 minutes on the clock. Alireza is down to 1 minute and 27 seconds. Rook b to f1. Going after rook to f7 check, and Magnus plays a bishop captures on c5. And now you have to decide, do you go for rook to f7 check, king h6, and then rook to c1? Looks very nice, as the bishop doesn't seem to have anywhere else to go. But now rook f8, and this is how you avoid losing a piece. And if rook c to f1, you can just go back, rook to c8. So that's one way to play it. But in the game, rook to c1 was played, and Magnus thought that this was not the way to go. He looked very weirded out by this during the game, and he played bishop to e3, attacking both of the rooks. We have rook captures on c8, bishop captures on f4, and now rook to d8. We have bishop captures on e5, and now rook captures on d7, attacking the king, king h6, and now rook to a7. Of course, you want to pick up the a6 pawn, so bishop to c4, rook to b7, and now bishop to d5. We have rook to b4, and now bishop to c3, attacking the rook. Rook to a4 and pawn to e5 now. Now the pawn is marching forward. You have the e1 square guarded, so it's starting to look very, very good for Magnus. But rook captures on a6. Alireza also creates a passed pawn. We have pawn to e4, knight to c1, and now pawn to e3. Of course, Alireza will have to give something for that pawn. Rook to d6, going after the bishop, and now bishop captures on a2. Knight captures on a2, and pawn to a2. Of course, you cannot capture the bishop because Magnus gets a queen into the game, so it's time to part with the rook. Rook to e8, we have pawn to e1 queen, or no, Magnus brought a rook into the game, we have to be precise. To be funny, rook captures, and now bishop captures on e1. And we have this position that's basically a draw if played to perfection, but you still have to play it to perfection. So a lot of moves were played. Magnus, of course, as Alireza was low on time, he wanted to take the full point. So I'm just gonna fast forward some 30 moves until we get some sort of an interesting position here. as they were mostly just making moves, you know, to make the other guys to make the other guy lose time. Yeah, they were both playing an increment. Both of them are below the 30-second mark, and now a very interesting thing happened here. After this bishop to e5 move, Alireza played knight to h3, and king to e3 was played. Knight to f2, now pawn to h5. If you capture, then of course it doesn't work. Knight to h3, bishop to d6. Now the idea here is that if the knight is captured, of course you just capture and you're gonna eliminate that pawn. Doesn't really matter what you do. Or even if you play bishop to f6, then just g4. And if you play pawn to h4, it's still a draw. You don't care about the g pawn. You're gonna put your king on h1. It's a light square, and the dark square bishop cannot kick away the white king from a light square. So that's the trick. You want to sacrifice your piece to force your opponent into having those pawns that promote on light squares. But bishop to d6, we have knight to g5, king d4, knight h3 again, king e4, knight f2 check, king to f5, and knight h3. So Alireza being very persistent here. But now, after a few more moves were made, king to e5, knight to d3 check, king e4, Alireza played knight to b4, and that is the losing move. Any other move, well, not any other, but you could play knight to b1, knight to b2, you could play knight to e1, but not knight to b4. Now, what's the problem with this move? Feel free to pause the video and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on realizing that yes, the knight is trapped or not, but then you lose the game. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is bishop to c5, the only move that wins the game, and we are going to discuss why, because it's really awesome. Now, what are some of the squares that you can use for your knight? You could go to a6, but then bishop to d6, and all of the squares that the knight can use are covered, and you're just gonna approach the knight and capture it. There is no escape for this knight. Another thing you could do is play knight to c2, but what happens here? King to d3. You attack the knight. Of course, you can't go here. You have to go back, or you have to go here. Knight to e1 check. King to e2, you attack the knight, and after knight to c2, king to d2. Again, you can't go here, you can't go here, can't go here. Have to go into the corner, and then king c3, king to b2, and you attack the knight and capture it. So that's what happens there. And lastly, if you go knight to a2, then king to d3, and after knight to c1 check, king to c4, and it seems like you can escape knight to e2, but look at this, bishop to e3. And you cannot go to f4 because black will just capture, and then two pawns, of course, will defeat the one pawn. And if king to f1, look at this, king d3, king to e1, king to e4, and now you're just lost. King to f2, king to f3 is coming. You're gonna attack the pawn. Bishop to f2 is coming. You're gonna win the pawn, and you will just be up to two full pawns. So that's why bishop to c5 is so strong, and Magnus played it. So Alireza did not play any of the lines that we've discussed. He tried knight to c6, but it is of course also losing as Magnus wins the knight. King to d5, knight to d8 with bishop to e7, knight to b7, and now bishop to b4. Alireza repeats knight to d8, and now bishop to c3, king to f2, and now bishop to f6. Attacks the knight, knight to b7, and now bishop to d4 with check. And he was in this position on move 82 that Alireza Firouzja resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The problem is, once the king moves, it doesn't really matter where, you're going to play bishop to b6, you're going to take away a5 and d8 from the knight, and that's it, no more moves. King to d3, you're going to play king to c6, and okay, you could try going after the pawns, and it even is very interesting. King captures on b7, king to f5, and now bishop to d8, you stop king to b6, king to b5, g5, and after king to g6, going after the pawn, you just advance the pawn. Captures, you push, and then g1 comes with check, and that's it. The rest is, of course, easy. Even your uncle can take this one. So that's what happened in the tie breaks. So Magnus won the first game, and now Alireza has to win the second game in order to force even more tie breaks to go into blitz tie breaks, where he will be having the black pieces. So let's see what happened in the third game. Magnus with the white pieces opened with pawn to e4. Even nicer as now there's a queen on e1. We have pawn to h6 by Alireza, and here, well, everyone said that Alireza was a little bit tilted. That's why he played this pawn to h6 move. The engine says once black plays pawn to h6 move, that black is on the verge of defeat. That's how bad this move is in this position. But I mean, what do you know? I mean, the bishop is coming to h7. Why is it such a bad move? But okay, d4. Magnus grabs the full center. If it works for regular chess, should work for chess 960. Bishop to h7, and now pawn to f3. Just enjoying the full center here. We have pawn to e6 and pawn to a4 now. Bishop to e7 and pawn to a5. So enjoying the full center and also really stifling that black king. Alireza plays a6, prevents Magnus from playing a6 himself, and now knight to f2. Just nicely developing. We have pawn to d5 and knight to d2. We have knight to d7 and now knight to d3. Just improving the position of the knights. And here, knight to f6. Already seems to be a losing position for Alireza. The only way to play this is f5, but I mean, doesn't really look like much. If you can hold this, you know, if you can burn time playing this, okay, so maybe f4, knight captures, and then queen to c, queen to f7 is the idea, but yeah, it doesn't look like something a human would play. So knight to f6, we have pawn to c4 now. Magnus wants to open up the c file for his rook, and then maybe even bring this rook into the attack. The bishop is attacking, everything is attacking here. It's not going to be easy for Alireza to defend that king. Knight to g6, we have bishop to a4 with an attack on the queen. Queen to d8, and now queen to e2. We have knight to h5 and the g3, stopping the infiltration of the knights via the f4 square. c6, and now bishop back to c2. Knight comes to f6. We have e captures on d5, e captures on d5, and now knight to e5. An excellent square for the knight, and of course, if you trade, then d captures on e5, white breaks through, and the king is, well, definitely feeling the draft. So instead, knight to e5, we have knight to h8, just defending on f7, and now bishop captures on h7, knight captures, and c captures on d5. C captures, rook captures on c8, queen captures, and now knight to b3. Now the knight has access to c5. We have knight to g5 and king to a2, preparing to bring the rook to c1, so sort of artificially castling. Queen to e8, and now rook to c1. We have pawn to f6, chasing away the knight, but now pawn to h4, attacking this knight. For this knight, we have knight to h3, and now queen to c2. Now, what's the idea behind the queen to c2? Can you just capture the knight on e5? Well, not really, because queen to c7 with check comes in after king goes here. Queen to b6 check, king to b8, and now, well, you could... Or you could just check, and once the king goes here, you play captures, you open up the bishop, but yeah, a lot of really cool options here. Queen to c, yeah, this is not the best line. King a7, queen to b6 with check, and after king to b8, now bishop to e3. First, you prevented the capture of the bishop via the knight, and now you will, of course, capture, open up the diagonal, and that's how you will win it. You can have one check, but after king to b1, it's not really doing anything. So instead, bishop to d6 was played, guarding the c7 square, and now bishop to e3. Very useful, as it prevents the capture of the bishop, but also once the knight is attacked, there's no saving this knight, so it's also very tricky. And here, yeah, you could capture, but then it comes to d captures on e5 with an attack on the bishop, and now bishop to b6, followed by queen. After, let's say, bishop to d6, bishop to c7 with check, you have to win this square, and now after captures, king to a7, now comes queen to b6 check, king to b7, and the rook to c7, now going for checkmate, and there's nothing you can do. You have to give up the queen, and that's it. So instead, after bishop to e3, king to e7 was a7 was played, and now pawn to f4. Still offering the knight, but you can't really capture it in any of the lines. Again, if you capture it, just d captures on e5. This comes with check, even worse. And after king b8, bishop to b6, all the all the lines are the same. You can't really abandon the c7 square due to checkmate, and white will just recapture material. Also, yeah, you can also pick up the knight. You can't save the knight. So many ways to win this. So instead, after f4, rook to d8 was played, and now knight to c5. Just adding more firepower here. Queen to b5 by Alireza, and now queen to b3 by Magnus. Interestingly, Magnus plays the only move that doesn't win. Not the only move, but one of the moves that doesn't win. The actual way to win this is knight to e6, to go after the rook and after the g7 pawn. And now there is no good way to defend. If queen captures with check, king b1, and rook to g8, you guard the pawn, but now knight to c6 with check, you have to take, otherwise you're going to lose the queen, and now, okay, the position is just dead lost here. Queen to b6, you're going to offer a trade, queen d7 check. Now if you block with the queen, you lose the bishop, and if you move the king, then rook to c6, and that's it. You start capturing, and you're going to checkmate the black king very quickly. So instead, after queen b5, queen to b3 was played. Magnus offers a queen trade. He did win the first wrapped game, so of course he's hoping to not lose this one, as that will garner him the win. But now Alireza plays queen captures on a5 with check. The actual way to play this now was bishop captures on c5, and now look at this: queen captures on b5, a captures, and the rook captures on c5. Now, of course, you will play f captures on e5, and after f captures, you go knight to g6. You just continue, as there's no easy way to reach the knight. You go rook to c1, you try and trap the knight. It doesn't really work. Knight to e7, and once you go after the knight with rook to h1, there's knight to f5. You attack the bishop here, and there's no way to keep an eye on the df2 square, and the knight will escape. So it's very tricky, but yeah, it was possible. But queen captures on a5 check was played, king to b1, and now queen to b5, offering a trade, but now queen captures on b5. You could also trade capture on d5, but trading is also winning, and Magnus goes for it. Knight to e6 puts pressure on the rook and on the g7 pawn. Rook to g8, and now rook to h1, going after the knight. We have king to b8, now comes rook captures on h3, f captures on e5, and now d captures on e5. Bishop back to e7, and now rook to h1, bringing the rook back into the attack. King to c8, we have rook to c1 with check, king to d7, and now pawn to f5, and now the pawn's controlling all of these squares. The monster knight on e6, this is now winning for Magnus. The rook controlling the c file, the bishop nicely complementing them, too much to handle. Bishop to d8 was played, but here Magnus played rook to c5, and he was in this position on move 37 that Alireza Firouzja resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. You could try something like g6, but then rook captures on d5. There was no defending the pawn, and once the king moves, you're going to play f6, and there's just no way to develop knight f7. For example, knight f7, you're going to trade here, and after knight captures, you're going to capture on h6. Now you're up 2 pawns, and of course, completely winning for Magnus. So yeah, Magnus did lose the first classical game, but he retaliated in the second one, and he took down Alireza in both of the rapid tiebreaks. Alireza was doing great in the first rapid game, but then he lost that endgame. That's a draw, but one draw that Magnus can basically play forever. And he was, he stumbled onto a losing square, and that was all that it took. And then, as they say, he wasn't really playing the second game as impressively as he did the first 2 classical games and the first rapid game. But yeah, Magnus eliminates Alireza. He was very happy in the interview after the game. He said that he'd be really, really sad that if he was eliminated, as this is the first big event of Chess 960 like this in the world. Okay, you did have the Fisher Random World Championship, but other than that, as a just a tournament that someone is organizing, it is the first one, especially with the mixed format. So he of course wants to do very well, and he didn't do so impressively in the rapid playoffs. So he really wanted to do well here. And now he eliminated Alireza. He will be facing Nodirbek Abdusattorov, who has been playing an incredible event. He won the playoffs. He played both of his games incredibly impressively. Eliminated Ding Liren, and now Magnus Carlsen is the one that has to face him. And the way Nodirbek is playing, Magnus is the underdog in this matchup. Fabi will be playing Levon, so we'll see what happens. We'll cover the games, and hope you enjoy that. Yeah, sorry about a bit of a longer video. I know 3 games are a lot, but I thought that they were important to check out. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank David Benz, Robert Aratun, Doug Repka, and Baby Solomon, Alexander Gita, and David Gasparian for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.